start off today getting this old K Archtop into shape. The owner is working on some jazz, and this fits the scope of what's required. I'm assuming it's a K. Could be a harmony, maybe. I don't know for sure because I think the neck is replacement. Where the body appears to be from the 40s or 50s, this neck I'm imagining is probably 60s or early 70s. It looks a little more harmonesque to me. The addition of some hip shot tuners, locking tuners. And don't know what the wood is. Actually looks kind of like birch to me. Multi-ply. And this kind of funny business is not too unusual for these guitars. You know, they were made in the millions over some 20 odd years. They're fairly robust, laminated materials, not that easy to break, so they tend to last a good long time. They were also quite out of fashion for many, many years, so it used to be kind of a rite of passage for people who wanted to do work on guitars to pick one of these up for $50 or $100, do all of the things necessary and practice on them. And then after about a week's worth of work, you could end up with something worth almost $150. So, you know, not terribly valuable, but made with some honesty, and they are repairable. The bridge on this one seems to have had the biscuit. It's ill-fitting. I'm not sure it's original. I'm not sure I really care. The owner grafted some material on in an attempt to kind of get it closer to fit, but I think we're ready to concede that it's time for a $25 Amazon replacement. The frets have some inconsistencies. There's some regional buzzing going on. One of the nut slots, well, specifically the B string, is a little bit low. There are miscellaneous cracks. Several big ones through the back here have previously been glued up. You know, the adhesives used in these old plywoods can get brittle or give way under the stresses of humidity and time. Often they're made of sequence matched veneer over a cross-grained core, and sometimes both of the outside layers will crack in unison, which is very authentic looking. I'll have to look it over and make sure there aren't any that are open. That's another thing I caution people about. Sometimes the old plywood will have interior separations between the layers, which you can't see, of course, but they can buzz and be really difficult to track down and fix. You know, we'll end up drilling holes and injecting glue in various spots, hoping it will end up in the right place. It had a pickguard at one time. We're going to make a new one. The player might eventually want to install a pickup on this thing. So all in all, the work doesn't seem too daunting. Just get through it. Actually, I think I've amended my opinion. I believe this is a harmony. There is a familiar looking batch code in there. And on the back there is a little stamp that says S46, which would be Spring Catalog of 1946 for harmony. The action is just fine. It's 5/64 on the bass, 4 on the treble. Neck relief, 14 thousandths. Could be a little better. Let's see if the truss rod works. That doesn't look like it's been touched in a very long time. It seems to be 5/16 like a Gibson, or 8 millimeters. We'll back it off first. There seems to be a little tension on it, but not a whole lot. Let's give it a bit of a squeeze. And try again. Now we're down around 7 thousandths, which I consider much better. Oh, I want to change this bridge if for no other reason to get rid of the ends of the screws here. Just laceration after laceration. Well, there's plenty of fret height. It's about 45 thousandths. So I can dress these no problem. Although it gets, you know, it's inconsistent. That's 35 here, it's 45 there. So we have to be careful. So we're in the neck jig now to hold things steady. The ends of these frets I really don't like, you know. There's a kind of indistinct quality. Like, where does the end start? It just sort of slumps over there amorphously. There's no beginning and end to the chamfer. which doesn't really help, you know. If the string's running across that, it really just wants to go right off the edge. I think you want a defined point. What's playing surface and what isn't. The surface of the frets were uneven enough that I figured a full dress was necessary. So I put the thing in the neck jig and worked on getting things perfectly straight. This guitar, as usual, had a bit of a ski jump situation going on at the body end. So I dressed a little bit of fall away into those top frets using a short leveling beam and applying some tape to the 14th fret there to kind of pitch things down towards the body. Recrowning. The new bridge, which was a piece of genuine Macassar ebony, dyed black, requires a bit of sanding to conform to the arch on the top. Quite a bit of sanding, in fact. We've got some sandpaper there, and that'll show me the high spots, which I can get after with a scraper and then do more sanding and then more scraping. The contact surfaces for the thumb screws were a little bit angled and not giving me perfect contact, so I got after them with a file. Pickguard. It's useful to have a template or two on hand for occasions such as these. This is a 1930s L30, which I think should fit the bill. In terms of material, I'm going with black, white, black plastic. Wouldn't tortoise be more classy? Yes, but people do not understand just how expensive a chunk of solid tortoise-colored material that's thick enough for an archtop guitar actually is. So by the time they tack on the import duties, it's like almost $90 Canadian, which is $60 American right now, just for the plastic. It's kind of crazy, but there are very few places you can actually buy the stuff. And please don't go rushing to send me Amazon links to stuff that's only 25 thousandths of an inch thick and printed on white plastic with a dot matrix printer. That would not be helpful. So, factoring in the labor charge for cutting one of these out, using tortoise acrylic gets ridiculous on anything less valuable than, say, a Gibson. So, black plastic it is. Following my creative sirens, I decided in the moment to make the guard just a little bit wider. I think it would look better because this is a fairly wide archtop. So, I'm going to be a bit more generous with the outline. Drum sander for the interior curves. I have to be efficient because it's -8 and if I linger I'll eventually lose my fingertips from the cold. Disc sander for the exterior curves. I was just joking, my fingers are fine down to about -20. I'm scraping on a bit of a bevel to expose the white. There's a pre-existing condition in the form of a hole from a previous screw, so I'll measure that and try and get it in the right place on the replacement. The original owner must have had some rough trousers. You taping sandpaper to your knee or something? I think I'm going to have to bend this bracket a little bit because it runs afoul of the top. And the attachment screw was protruding too far, with the possibility of marring the soundboard in a place you'll never see again, however. I decided to protect the delicate eyes of the viewing audience, which might not have had its safety glasses on, by blocking what could have been a dramatic shot. Removing the excess length. What fun. You have to do it slowly, too, otherwise it's going to rip into numerous pieces, and it won't be nearly as satisfying. Behold. Well, that shouldn't be. I'll reinforce it with a little tiny cleat. Put a little glue in there and clamped it. With strings on, I can then mark the string spacing on the top surface of the bridge. I'll use my nut slotting files to cut a little nick to keep the strings in their correct positions. And once again, the top of the saddle posts are inordinately sharp. Here's a more satisfying shot of a cutoff wheel. Lop those off. Round over the edges. Polish them up. Much nicer to have and to hold. On virtually any harmony nut, there's going to be a surplus of material hanging around over top of the strings, so I'll dress that off and make it a little more presentable. Well, I think we're going to call that one done. The setup didn't change all that much, but it feels a whole lot easier to play. Very nice. Oh yeah, got a real kind of thing going down, getting down. Gonna tear the frets off the sucker. Yeah, it's been a while. Fretless conversion. The patient in question here is an Ibanez BTB. It's a 6-string bass. It weighs a ton. This ought to be good. Okay, I looked it up. According to the interwebs, BTB stands for Boutique Bass. And they are kind of an upscale thing for, you know, your home player. They're not outrageously expensive, but they are maybe a cut above some of your Ibanez line. And they've been around longer than I would have thought. The first ones came out in 1999. There are a good many different iterations, numbers of strings, designs, wood combinations, etc. This one is made of laminated materials. It looks like it's got walnut, something that looks vaguely ashy. That's maple. That is hard to say. Almost looks like Cocobolo rosewood. But, you know, a whole bunch of stuff. Active electronics, all kinds of tone shaping and stuff going on in there. And in this case, 6 strings. It's got a 3 on the side headstock. This model has dual truss rods, which may or may not give us problems. We shall see. You know, there's some carving which has gone on in the back here to give you some access for your hand. The neck shape is wide, obviously. Fairly flat on the back and not unlike a classical guitar. You know, it's more flat than it is round. And the goal is, as I said, to make it fretless. Interesting. Bassists love to put on a brand new set of strings right before they take their instrument in for a repair. I think it's a point of pride. Either that or they've got the same strings on from 1986 and they don't want you to touch them and don't want you to change them because they have the sound, right? So this is a combination of those things. New strings, we're going to try and save them. Now I want to take some action measurements before we get started here because I'm going to want to replicate this as much as I can with the new fretless setup. Quite low. Bass string here is just about 4/64ths, and top string is just a hair over 2/64ths, 32nd of an inch. That's quite low for an instrument of this size. Also confirm the tuning here. A, D, a lot of buzz on that D, G, kind of, B, F, I think, G sharp. That's an interesting tuning. I'm going to check the relief in the neck with the strings on. That low A has virtually none. Next one does have some relief. Seems to be around 7/1000ths. As I'm slackening strings, I can tell this neck is going into a significant back bow, which is kind of what you would expect it to do. I'm going to keep an eye on it. Just going to wrap the strings in some paper here where they cross over the body so they're not grinding against it and making marks in the wood. This base isn't all that old, and these frets, of course, are hardly worn. Around 40/1000ths of an inch tall. Just kind of what I would expect. I can see a little bit of a sheen along the sides of the frets, which indicates to me these probably have had some thin super glue wicked in them to hold them in place. So when I take these out, I should be careful about that. I'm going to try and remove them without doing my usual score line along either side, because that can sometimes show up. Now I imagine I'm going to have to surface this area with some sanding blocks to make it smooth and regular and straight. But if I don't have to score them, I won't. You get into the corner here. I'm going to want to use the fret hold down thing. Just some very thin sheet metal. What this does is, as I'm chomping with my pullers, it advances ahead of the pressure and holds the fingerboard surface down. Hopefully holding those areas that would ordinarily want to split or pitch upwards. That's just about as clean as you could hope for. Most of them were just as cooperative. I was happy with that. To get rid of the little end piece, I decided to saw inwards using an appropriate saw. I'm not sure if this was routed on a CNC or if this is filler. However, I just wanted to make sure it was cleanly cut. I have some maple veneer, which is 21/1000ths of an inch thick, which was just right. So I cut off some slices and prepared it not unlike the way I usually prepare regular frets. Just get an appropriate length, snip it off, and do the rest of them at one time. And I glued them in. I used regular woodworking glue. They wanted to sort of pop up on the ends, so I also used a little bit of thin CA glue as well. After trimming them flush, I flooded the entire surface with CA glue, hoping it would penetrate and keep the maple from picking up too much of the rosewood color, which is something that's just naturally going to happen. They tend to go a little bit brown over time. The forward thumb rest infill was now just a little bit proud of the surface of the fretboard, so that has to come out so I can thin it slightly. It was stuck on there with some really sticky tape. I had to string the base up so that I could adjust it so that the fretboard would be flat under tension, which would allow me to then dress it down in the neck jig. This is another one of those instruments. It would be very difficult to do this without a neck jig of some sort, because it just wants to back bow so severely you'd never get it straight. Sanded things up, apply the coat of oil. I can see that the infill was actually quite convex. It was rocking, so I flattened that before applying some more tenacious tape. Reestablishing the nut height. I don't own a fret file big enough for those lower two strings, so I did like the old-timey bass makers of old and used a rat tail file. Okay. It is without frets. This thing it's enormous, and just staring at it, it reminds me of certain Pleistocene era megafauna. You know, those sort of elephants that aren't quite elephants and rhinoceroses that aren't quite rhinoceroses. It's huge. We'll plug it in. It'll probably destroy my amp.